Some wounds don't leave visible scars. They linger in quiet spaces in a glance turned away too quickly, in a laugh that doesn't quite reach the eyes, in the hesitation to believe again. This is the story of Claire, a woman who loved, lost, and for a long time believed that survival was the best she could hope for. But life, unpredictable and quietly stubborn, often finds a way to slip through the cracks of even the most carefully built walls. Sometimes in the laughter of strangers, sometimes in the rain, sometimes in the steady hands of someone patient enough to wait. This is not a story about perfect endings, it's about imperfect beginnings. About the bravery it takes to heal. About the silent victories that happen when we choose, against all fears, to hope again. It is a story for anyone who has ever been broken and who still, somehow, dares to dream of being whole. Welcome to Claire's journey. It begins, as all real journeys do, with a single choice: to stay, to believe, to love again. Disheartened by everything that had happened to her, Claire had lost faith and happiness, in the hope of finding someone to share her life with, even in the friendship of others. She had always been a very cheerful, loving child, always helping everyone around her and showing affection wherever she went. Claire dreamed that when she grew up, she would find the love of her life. They would have children, dogs, and a life filled with happiness, and so she grew up, holding on to that dream. And from so much dreaming, she eventually found it. Her fiancé, Rick, was handsome, with an easy smile and polished promises. He spoke of their future as if weaving a quilt, a small house, laughing children, growing old hand in hand. Claire dove headfirst into this dream. They walked hand in hand everywhere, shared dinners and coffees, traveled together to Paris, where he proposed. Everything seemed perfect until the knife of betrayal struck, and it wasn't just sharp, it was cruel. Claire found out in the worst possible way, standing alone at the altar. She had not only lost the man she loved, but also her sister, her own blood, who had promised to be her safe harbor during any storm. Suddenly, on what should have been the happiest day of her life, she realized all the moments when Rick had given her sister lingering looks, made unnecessary touches, and insisted on them all dining together. The more she pieced it together, the more she imagined how much they must have laughed behind her back. Together, they hid the truth. Together, they carved a wound so deep that even time seemed powerless to heal it. When Claire found out, there were no screams, no scenes, only silence, deep, overwhelming silence that separated her from the world in a way words could never reach. Since that day, she carried the scars of loss, not on her body, but in her soul. A kind of loneliness that no crowd could erase. Claire, the girl who had once sought love, now understood, in the most brutal way, that trusting was a luxury she could no longer afford. It wasn't anger she felt, just a silent exhaustion. And so, with her heart still beating inside her chest, but protected by tall, invisible walls, Claire decided it was no longer time for love, it was time to survive. When pain sinks too deeply, the body seeks what the soul doesn't yet know how to ask for. Claire hadn't planned her escape. One day, she simply realized she needed to leave. Far away. Somewhere the language was strange, the faces unknown, and no memory could catch her around the corner. She chose Italy. Not because she had roots there, or a long-held dream of visiting, but because something in the photos of golden fields and ancient cities seemed to promise some form of forgetting, or at least silence. She arrived in Rome under a sky undecided, between clouds and sunlight, as if even the weather received her with caution. The first few days, Claire simply walked. She walked until her feet ached, until her eyes drowned in beauty that did not belong to her. Among the ruins of the Colosseum, she saw more than stones. She saw memories of battles, resistance, and glories past that. Even in ruins, still demanded reverencian trastevere. She sat at small cafes, watching old men debate politics as if the world depended on each word. She ordered strong coffee, ate bread that melted in her mouth, and for brief moments forgot her own name in Florence. She was left speechless before the delicacy of the marble statues. David was not just a statue, it was a reminder. Humans could be broken and still remain sublime Tuscany. She found herself surrounded by fields waving in the breeze like green seas. There, under the orange sky, among vineyards and the scent of wet earth, Clair, for the first time in a long time, cried, not desperate tears. A gentle, almost surrendered cry, as if accepting that some wounds do not heal, but can be carried with dignity in Venice. She lost herself among alleys and canals, letting the city full of curves, like her own heart, embrace her without questions. Little by little, without noticing, Clair began to rebuild herself. Not with promises, not with grand gestures, but through small moments of beauty, a sunset scene from a forgotten bridge, an impromptu conversation with an old flower seller, the scent of the sea drifting through narrow streets didn't save her, but it taught her that surviving could also be beautiful, even if the soul still hurt to the touch. There are moments when life, tired of our resistance, simply imposes itself. For Clair, that moment came on a clear morning in the small town of San Gimignano, where medieval towers seemed to watch over the footsteps of visitors. She was strolling, distracted, savoring the smell of freshly baked bread, when she heard a crash, a startled cry, followed by the sound of baskets spilling across the stone street. Looking down, she saw fruits rolling at her feet, apples, pears, ripe figs, and kneeling amid the chaos was an old man, his face red, hands trembling, trying to gather the little world that had spilled across the sidewalk. Clair hesitated for a moment. Her old instinct to protect herself, to stay uninvolved, screamed at her to walk away, but there was something in the man's eyes, a mix of wounded pride and helplessness that she knew all too well. Without thinking, she knelt beside him. "Permit?" she asked in hesitant Italian. The old man smiled, shy, and together, in silence, they began picking up the scattered fruits, mending a small piece of dignity in the middle of the street. Helping him didn't change her life. It didn't erase her scars, but in that simple, almost insignificant gesture, Clair realized something she hadn't felt in a long time, the strength of a moment that asked for nothing in return. When she handed the man the last rescued fig, he held her hands rough and firm and said simply, "Grazie, ragazza buona." "Good girl." Clair smiled a small smile, the kind that still carries fear, and continued on her way. But something, deep down, had shifted. Sometimes, she thought. Later, what begins to heal us are not grand gestures. They're small moments like fallen fruits, and the decision not to look away. Some stories, no matter how accidental they seem, were already being written long before the characters realized it. The next day, Clair woke up with a thought that didn't ask for permission. She wanted to check on the old man from the market. Maybe it was gratitude, maybe compassion, or maybe just the human desire to belong, even briefly, to someone else's story. She returned to the same square in San Gimignano, now bathed in a more generous sun. She walked slowly, her heart beating with a strange kind of nervousness she couldn't explain, and there he was, the trembling-handed old man, now steadier, sitting in the shade of a tree, chatting animatedly with a younger man. It wasn't hard to notice the connection between them. The same smile, though the younger one's was adorned with shy dimples, the same way of gesturing with his hands, the same spark of life in his eyes. The young man was tall, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, with that kind of natural elegance that comes not from clothes, but from the way one moves through the world. Clair hesitated. It wasn't in her nature to intrude on connections that didn't belong to her, but the old man saw her, and with a warm gesture, waved her closer, "Ragazza buona." He called out, genuine joy in his voice. The young man looked up, curious. As Claire approached, the old man, disarming in his simplicity, said, "This is Claire. She saved my day. Yesterday." And turning to her, he added, "This is my son, Matteo Matteo." The name seemed to carry the warm sound of Italian afternoons. He extended his hand large, warm, and when their eyes met, there was that kind of silence that doesn't apologize for arriving. "Nice to meet you, Claire," he said. In English laced with a gentle Italian accent that felt more like an embrace than a barrier, the conversation started shyly, filled with small pauses that the breeze seemed to fill, but little by little, it filled with small smiles, tentative questions. Short and sincere laughs. Claire, who had sworn to herself that she would never allow enchantment again, realized with a pang of fear and another of hope that there was something about Matteo that slipped past her defenses without asking permission. It was in the simple gestures, the way he truly listened, the way he smiled more with his eyes than with his lips, that she found signs of a kindness that was not loud. She didn't know it yet, but that quiet meeting in that forgotten square was the first thread of a new story, and this time, perhaps fate was ready to be kinder. And when it's meant to happen, life gifts us with unexpected synchronicities. Life sometimes hides its miracles in the most unlikely places, like a thunderstorm on a clear day. Claire and Matteo had met casually again the next afternoon, near the old well in the main square. They chatted about silly things, the sweetest fruits, Italian words she still stumbled over, when suddenly the sky shifted, a gust of wind, the sudden scent of wet earth. Then the first heavy raindrops began to fall, splattering against the ancient stones under their feet. Instinctively, Claire looked for shelter. But before she could take a step, Matteo smiled a mischievous, boyish grin, and in an impulsive gesture, reached for her hand. "Vini," he called, pulling her along, and just like that, before she could think, Claire was running through the rain-soaked streets of San Gimignano, laughing without understanding, letting the rain wash away the weight of her thoughts. They ran as if childhood stolen by time had returned by the whim of destiny. Finally, breathless, they stopped under an old ivy-covered veranda, their refuge from the storm. They could hear the rain drumming on the worn roof above. Matteo leaned back against the wall, still smiling, his hair soaked and clinging to his forehead, his clothes heavy with water. Claire, catching her breath, realized that, for the first time in a long while, the world had shrunk down to something simple. No past, no future. Only that moment, two strangers, two survivors, sharing the simplicity of a storm, and somehow, inexplicably, Claire felt herself beginning, very slowly, to trust life again. She looked at Matteo with eyes full of tenderness and gratitude for the good moments they had shared over the past 2 days. Matteo, perceptive as always, noticed the change in her expression. She seemed lighter, freer, but before he could ask anything, they were interrupted by a group of young people rushing under the veranda, laughing and shaking off the rain. Returning to the hotel, Claire felt different, though she couldn't quite understand what was happening. Fearing her own feelings, she chose to stay quiet in her room for the next 2 days. She didn't want to see Matteo. She wasn't sure what she was feeling, and still wounded by her past, she wasn't ready to open her heart to anyone else. A few days later, as she crossed the square where she had first met Matteo, she found him sitting near the same tree, just like that first day. What she didn't know was that in those days, he had searched for her everywhere. This time, Matteo had a different kind of invitation. He didn't suggest a sightseeing tour, nor a dinner in a bustling restaurant. "I want to show you a special place," he said, his voice low, as if offering something intimate. "Something from my family, Claire hesitated. The old instinct to protect herself was still alive inside her. But there was also the new seed that had been planted by the rain, the desire to take a risk, even without guarantees. She accepted. They set out early, in an old car, along the winding roads that cut through the Tuscan hills. The wind was sweet, carrying the scent of cypress and lavender. The fields, golden under the summer sun, swayed like slow-moving seas under the open sky. The property was small, hidden among ancient vineyards and twisted olive trees. A stone house with faded blue windows and a porch draped with wildflower pots. Matteo prepared a simple picnic for her, a basket with local cheeses, still warm bread, and wine from his family's vineyard, wine that, according to him, was imperfect, but made with love. They sat in the shade of a centuries-old olive tree, there, unhurried. They spoke little, as if understanding that some healings ask for more silence than words. Claire gazed at the rolling horizon, and for the first time in a long time, imagined that maybe the future didn't have to be a barren field. Maybe, she thought, the future could have color. The color of aged wine. The color of golden fields. The color of brown eyes that, in silence, seemed to say, "You can trust again." In certain souls, scars run so deep that they can't be soothed with words or promises. Matteo knew this. He saw it in Claire's eyes, even when she smiled, the subtle shadow of fear, the hesitation of someone who had once had the ground ripped out from under her feet. So, that golden afternoon under the olive tree, as he packed up the picnic basket, Matteo made a gesture that might seem small to others, but would be unforgettable to Claire. He pulled something from the car's trunk, a simple package wrapped in plain paper and tied with a piece of twine. "A gift for you," he said, smiling shyly, "to remind you that good days still exist." Claire, surprised, accepted the package with care. It wasn't anything grand. It wasn't meant to impress her. It was meant to touch her inside. She found a small wooden box, rustic and polished, with a simple engraving on the lid, an olive tree, and burned into the wood, a single word, fiducia, trust. Inside the box, there was a delicate linen handkerchief, embroidered by hand with tiny, soft-colored flowers. And beneath the handkerchief, almost hidden, a note written in strong, slanted handwriting. "When you want to, when you're ready, I'll be here. No rush, no demands. Just waiting for the moment when your smile is whole again." Matteo. Claire held the note with trembling hands. In those few words, there was more respect than she had received in her entire life. Matteo wasn't trying to win her over with urgency, nor was he trying to tie her down with empty promises. He was offering her space, time. He was offering exactly what her wounded heart most needed to bloom again, the freedom to trust. That night, alone in her hotel room, Claire allowed the tears to come, not tears of sadness, but a rare kind of hope, timidly beginning to sprout in her chest. Maybe, she thought, life still had beautiful things reserved for those who knew how to wait for the right time to bloom. Healing doesn't always arrive with grand revelations. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, hidden in simple nights, under colorful lights, and the sweet smell of baking bread. It was Matteo who told her, almost casually, there would be a festival that night in a nearby village. One of those old celebrations where no invitation was needed, just the desire to laugh and dance if you'd like to come. He said, his voice light, with no pressure. "I'll be there." Claire hesitated. Part of her still feared the crowd, the loud laughter of strangers, the terror of getting lost again among unfamiliar faces, but another part, the same part that had smiled in the rain and kept the embroidered handkerchief, whispered that maybe it was time to try. She dressed without pretension, a polka-dotted dress she loved, already worn from use, but one that made her feel comfortable and happy. She looked at herself in the mirror, saw a lively young woman reflected back, smiled, and decided to go. When she arrived at the square, lit by hundreds of string lights draped between the trees, she felt an unexpected warmth rising in her chest. It wasn't grand, it was human, it was real. Rough wooden tables filled the plaza, crowded with simple dishes, homemade pasta, aged cheeses, crusty bread. Children ran with ribbons in their hands. Old men toasted as if the wine were new and time was generous. Matteo was there, of course. When he saw her, he smiled in a way that didn't just light up his face, it lit up the space between them. He didn't rush toward her. He didn't invade her space. He simply made room beside him, a silent invitation for her to join if she wished, and Claire wished. They sat together, laughing at the townspeople's stories, tasting sweets that stuck to their fingers. The music started, a joyful accordion, blended with the soft rhythm of drums, and some couples dared to dance. Claire, shy, watched. Matteo extended his hand, as if offering an adventure. "Vini a ballare?" He whispered, half teasing. She laughed, half in disbelief and conquering. Her fears placed her hand in his at first. Her steps were awkward, her smiles shy. But slowly, something inside her, something that pain had tried to put to sleep, awakened. She laughed. She truly laughed, laughed as if washing her soul, as if forgetting her scars, even if only for a moment. And Matteo, seeing her laugh like that, knew as only attentive hearts know that this was the beginning of something much bigger than any promise made in words. It was life itself, dancing once again in Claire's chest. The festival slowly came to an end, the same way summer does, without hurry, without noise. The lights, one by one, began to go out. The once vibrant voices became distant murmurs, and there they stayed, Claire and Matteo still sitting at the edge of the square, as if time had forgotten to call them. Matteo, sensing the moment, didn't push for anything. He simply stood up, offered his hand to Claire, and with a smile that was more a request than a command, suggested, "Shall we walk?" She accepted. They wandered through the village's narrow streets, now silent, bathed only in the soft glow of the stars. The air was warm, carrying the sweet smell of night flowers and damp earth. For several minutes, they said nothing. There was no rush. Sometimes, what needs to be said can only find voice once silence softens the wounds. It was Claire who finally broke the silence, her voice low, as if still testing her own courage. "I was betrayed by the ones I loved most." Matteo didn't interrupt. He simply kept walking beside her, listening by him. And my sister Claire continued, her voice firm but trembling with memory. "And for a long time, I thought there was something wrong with me, that maybe I didn't deserve love." Matteo stopped, turning toward her under the star-splattered sky. He didn't speak empty phrases. He didn't offer hollow promises. He simply looked at her completely, deeply, as someone who sees not just the pain, but also the courage hidden behind it. "You deserve all the beautiful things in the world, Claire," he said, his voice rough with sincerity. "And you deserve them in your own time, in your own way." Those words, simple and unadorned, sank into her like seeds into fertile soil. She smiled, a smile still timid, but real, and at that moment, under a sky that seemed to hold the whole universe as witness. Matteo stepped closer. He didn't kiss her right away. He simply waited, eyes locked with hers, as if asking permission to come closer. Claire didn't pull away, and then, very slowly, Matteo brushed his lips against hers, a kiss almost whispered, as light as the touch of a petal, filled not with impatient desire, but with silent promises of respect, of care, of hope. Beneath the ancient stars, two wounded souls were learning, together, the hardest lesson of all, to trust again. There are things between two people that neither time, logic, no reason can explain after that first kiss under the stars. Something changed between Claire and Matteo. Not loudly, not with rushed promises or confessions, it changed in the feeling of happiness. They could no longer hide. It changed in the way their eyes sought each other at every opportunity. The next morning, they met again. As if the night had left an invisible thread connecting their steps, they wandered through the local market, not for big shopping, but just to walk among the colorful stalls, tasting fruits, hearing the old ladies shout their offers with humor, laughter blending with the smell of fresh bread. And there, among simple things, their chemistry revealed itself even more strongly in the way their shoulders brushed casually and how they laughed at each other, unguarded, unafraid. It was an invisible, pulsing force, pulling them closer without effort. Claire felt her chest vibrate in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just desire, it was recognition, as if, in Matteo, she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Home, after their stroll, they sat at a small cafe hidden behind an old fountain. The sun gilded the stones of the square, and children chased pigeons, laughing brightly. Matteo sat quietly, thoughtful, looking at Claire as if gazing at something rare and precious. Then, with the calmness of someone offering a gift, not an obligation, he said, "Claire," she looked up at him, her heart beating faster. "I don't want you to think I'm trying to trap you," he began, his voice laden with sincerity. "But if you want, you could stay a little longer in Italy." The proposal floated between them, light yet dense. It wasn't a desperate plea. It wasn't an attempt to control. It was an invitation to continue what had begun to bloom there. Between simple gestures and silent embraces, Claire lowered her eyes for a moment, feeling the old battle stirring in her chest, the ancient, rooted fear, the urge to go back to what she knew, where safety meant never being hurt again, but also the growing will to stay, to experience more of the feeling blooming quietly. A delicate but living hope. Matteo didn't rush her. He simply waited, with that patient gaze, like someone who knows that the most beautiful flowers only bloom in their own time. And then Claire, without grand words, simply smiled a smile that said, "Yes." But Claire knew no paradise lasts forever. She had been in Italy for only a month. A precious month, carved out of her tightly scheduled life in the United States, where everything was planned, timed, measured by productivity. She had used her vacation to take care of herself, to breathe far from the emotional wreckage chasing her. But the calendar relentless reminded her time was running out. It wasn't just the money, it was the life waiting for her across the ocean. The secure job, the predictable routine, the normality that so familiar now felt like a shoe 2 sizes too small. Staying in Italy meant more than finding a temporary solution. It meant giving up everything she had built: her stable job, her social circle, the life that, for years, had served as her armor. And to stay, she would need to find a job here, without speaking fluent Italian, with no guarantees. It would mean starting from scratch. Matteo, intuitive as few were, sensed the change in her, not from what she said, but in what she didn't, in the tension in her gaze, in the way her fingers clung to his a little tighter, like someone afraid of losing the ground beneath her feet. On quiet night, sitting on the veranda of the small vineyard, surrounded by the sweet scent of olive trees and the distant music from the village, Matteo asked, with his usual calm, "You have to go back, don't you?" Claire took a long time to answer. How do you put into words the battle between what the heart longs for and what reality demands? "My work, my whole life is there," she said at last, her voice almost a whisper. "Here, I would have to start over, without speaking the language, without knowing where to step." Matteo looked at her for a long moment, the way only someone who truly understands can look. "And what does your heart want?" he asked, without pressure, but with a tenderness that broke through every defense. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel the weight of what was at stake. But she also felt the whisper of something new, fragile, but alive. The courage to, perhaps for the first time, choose not just to survive, but to live. She didn't have an answer yet, but in that instant, under the sky, heavy with silent stars, she knew whatever her choice would be, she would never be the same again. Choosing to stay wasn't simplet, was an internal, silent battle between reason whispering go back and her heart screaming. For the first time, Clair spent sleepless nights staring at the white ceiling of her simple room in San Gimignano. Feeling the weight of each possibility, returning to the U.S. meant security. A steady salary, a comfortable life, but it also meant returning to a half-lived existence, a version of herself she no longer recognized. Staying, on the other hand, was throwing herself into the unknown. It meant embracing uncertainty, fear, the humility of starting over in a land where she barely spoke the language. Above all, it was betting on something she had only dared to dream of, true happiness. The morning she made her decision, the sun crept through the window with a golden, shy light like a blessing, without fanfare, without promises to anyone but herself. Clair knew she would stay to give herself a chance. Stay to see what might blossom if, for once, she chose herself. That afternoon, when she met Matteo again in the field where the wind made the leaves sing, she carried the peace of someone who, even trembling, had decided. He noticed the moment he saw her. "You chose," he said, with a gentle smile, as if he had known the answer all along. Clair simply nodded, her eyes shining not with tears, but with courage. Matteo stepped closer, as he always did, slowly, respectfully, and then, without hesitation, without fear, he said, "I love you, Clair." The words came out simple, without flourish. They weren't grand, like in the movies. They were real, and they were everything she needed to hear. Clair felt her legs falter under the weight of that unexpected, inevitable confession. Before she could answer, Matteo continued, his voice filled with something deeper. "I need to tell you everything." He led her to the shade of an ancient olive tree, where time seemed to slow down. They sat on the grass, and Matteo, eyes lost on the horizon, began, "The vineyard where we are. It's been in my family for generations. We are." He hesitated, like someone who doesn't enjoy boasting. "Very wealthy." Clair blinked, surprised. Matteo, with his simplicity and ease among the townsfolk, had never given any sign of that. "I came here," he continued, "because I needed to find myself again. Our main companies are based in Florence. I worked endlessly, managing our businesses, with no time left for myself. A few months ago, I was supposed to get married. The bride came from a very influential family in Milan, and our marriage would have been an excellent merger between the two families. Everything was planned. But 10 days before the wedding, I found out she was cheating with a childhood friend of mine." The confession fell between them like a stone into a still lake. "Shattering the mirror of one of my best friends," he said, his voice cracking for the first time since Clair had known him. Matteo closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply before continuing, "I didn't come here to run away. I came to remember who I was before the world hardened me. Before I forgot what truly mattered, I came to find peace so I could move forward." Then he opened his eyes and looked directly at Clair. You remind me of who I am. Your simplicity. It captivated me from the moment I saw you. You showed me that love can live in the little things. A picnic on a summer afternoon, a village festival, a walk beneath the stars." Clair felt her heart collapse and rebuild itself in the same second. Matteo loved her not despite her scars, but because of them, because he recognized his own journey in hers in that moment. It no longer mattered the job she had left behind, the fears, the different language, the uncertain future. Only the now mattered in the now. Clair knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days began to flow easily, like a river finding its way among stones. Clair, who had arrived in Italy carrying a battered soul, now walked with firm steps, bright eyes, and a smile that blossomed first in her chest before reaching her lips. She was someone else, or perhaps finally herself. Matteo, always attentive, quickly realized that this strong, sweet woman deserved more than just a new love story. She deserved a whole future. One golden afternoon, as they walked among the rows of vines swaying in the warm breeze, Matteo stopped in front of Claire, holding a nearly ripe bunch of grapes in his hand. "I want to teach you everything I know about wine," he said, with that soft seriousness that was his hallmark. Claire arched an eyebrow, amused, not quite understanding where he was going. Matteo smiled and continued, "I want you to represent our vineyard in the United States. Not just for us, but for you." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words seemed enough. Matteo stepped closer, holding her hands firm, warm. "As always, you have something no amount of money can buy, Claire," he said, his eyes seeing even the parts of her she hadn't discovered yet. "You have soul. And soul is what gives wine its life." The project was real, to train her so that, in a few months, she could take the family's wines to America to present their labels, attend events, expand the brand with her unique sensitivity. But more than that, it was a way to give Claire both roots and wings. She would have the chance to grow professionally and still be able to visit her mother constantly, and she understood. There, among the vineyards and the open blue sky, Claire realized that true love is not the one that suffocates, but the one that lifts. That extends a hand not to hold you back, but to help you soar. By accepting Matteo's offer, Claire felt a new sensation. It wasn't fear, it wasn't doubt, it was enthusiasm. It was the desire to build something with her own hands, to plant her own seeds in the fertile soil that was now her life. That night, sitting on the vineyard's porch, watching the stars lazily blinking in the summer sky, Claire realized something even greater. She no longer remembered her former fiancé's face. She no longer felt the bitter taste of betrayal. The past, finally, was just that. The past. She was freeing for the first time. Her future was as vast and beautiful as the open sky ahead of her. The old narrator smiled softly, as if remembering a beautiful secret. Years later, if someone asked Claire when her life truly began, she would smile with that light in her eyes, the one that only those who have survived themselves carry, and say, "Under a Tuscan sky, when I chose to stay, the vineyard became not just a place to work, but a place to bloom." Claire learned about wines, about seasons, about the patient art of waiting for the right time to harvest. She traveled to America, representing Matteo's family winery with the elegance of someone who carries roots in her heart and wings in her soul. Matteo always stayed by her side, not as a shield, but as the wind that quietly lifts the one who dares to fly. They built a life made of small and enormous things: lunches under olive trees, glasses raised to sunsets, silent promises kept in the soft touch of their hands. The old wounds faded like distant storms. The past no longer defined her. Claire was not the girl abandoned at the church doors anymore. She was not the woman betrayed by those she trusted. She was Claire, whole, brave, free, and in a small stone house surrounded by fields of gold. Claire and Matteo loved each other quietly and endlessly. If they had always known that the best stories are not written at once, but grown slowly like vines, that, over time, find the sky. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this story. If this touched your heart, please let us know by leaving a like and sharing it with someone who might need a little hope today. Your support inspires us to keep bringing more stories of healing, strength, and second chances. See you in the next one.